Mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue à la mer des épées. Cheers. Ho, 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 and welcome to the final one of this year's Drizztmas videos. We are talking about The Sea of Swords, Book 3 in the Paths of Darkness trilogy by R.A. Salvatore, and the 13th Drizztmas book. Whew, can't believe we're getting to the end of this. So let's do the usual bit, where I tell you what the book is about, then we talk a bit about the structure, then we talk about how much it does represent Dungeons & Dragons as a tie-in product, how much it represents the Forgotten Realms as a tie-in product, and then we talk about all the things that are bad about it. And then, as a bonus, we'll do a bit of reflection on what we learned over the last 2.5 weeks. Won't that be fun? No, it won't. Trust me, it won't. Anyway, let's get started. Alright, Sea of Swords has 2.5 plot lines, and it follows mostly from Spine of the World and tries to bring Drizzt and gang back into the books, which means it's still about Wulfgar and the hammer and stuff, mostly. So let's talk about these 1.5 plot lines and then talk about the other plot line that kinda is also in here. The plotline of the hammer. See, Wulfgar is now in Waterdeep, and he hangs out with Captain Dudermond and is trying to get to pirate Sheila Cree, who has his hammer Aegis Fang. He's struggling with, trying to figure out who he is, whether he wants to become a pirate hunter, warrior, whatever you want to call it, or he wants to be a family man with his new wife in spirit and heart, even though it's not official yet, Delicurdy, and the adopted daughter that is called Coulson. Not Whitehead, because Drizzt's not her father. Point is, he's struggling with that. And that makes him less of a good fighter than usual, so there's some struggles there. At some point, however, he actually decides to go after the hammer. At the same time, Drizzt, Brunner, Regis, and Catti-brie are hanging out in Icewind Dale and doing the things that they're usually doing, which is, killing random highwaymen and highwaywomen. And they come across someone that has Aegis Fang's mark on their back as a branding. A lady highwayman, so a highwaywoman, I guess. So they think that Wulfgar's dead and the hammer is with some evil guys now, or ladies in this case. So they go looking after it. They find out that Wulfgar's still alive. They unite with Wulfgar to go after the pirate stronghold of Sheila Cree, which is called Golden Cove. They murder everybody and take back the hammer. Story well done. Now everyone is united, everyone's happy, good times all around. Unless, there's another plot line. Another plot line is, of course, the plotline of Lenorinel trying to murder Drizzt. See, we do have to have one of those as well. It starts and kind of frames this story, but doesn't connect in any meaningful way to the rest of the plot. Lenorinel is an elf that really wants to kill Drizzt Do'Urden because Drizzt is a drow, and we all know that drow are evil and imposters, and he's not actually a hero. So Lenorinel has decided to kill Drizzt, and he's training and collecting some magic and stuff, and then learns that to find Drizzt Do'Urden, he has to make the sign of the hammer be his guide. And then he plays a long-ass bass solo and only wears leather and fur loincloths. No, Lenorinel hooks up with Sheila Cree, waits for Drizzt, and while everyone gets murdered, they fight their long-ass duel, almost kill each other. Then Lenorinel puts off the mask. We find out that Lenorinel is, in fact, Elithane, the elven child that Drizzt saved all the way back in Homeland. And, Brunner comes in, gives a healing potion to Drizzt. Drizzt survives. Lenorinel, Elithane is dead. The end. We didn't learn anything out of that plotline. It's just in there as well. So, now you have it. The end of Paths of Darkness. Everyone is united again. Good times up ahead, right? Let's look at the structure for a moment. The structure as a whole makes no sense. The elven revenge plotline around Lenorinel is just unnecessary for this book. The Hunt for the Hammer plotline does work out fairly well. There's one issue here that is, of course, the connection or the way that Drizzt and gang are pulled into the adventure, with one lady pirate, Jewel Pepper, deciding to go to become a highwaywoman all the way in Icewind Dale. There's no explanation for this. There's no reason for her to do that. It's just happened for some reason. Now you may ask, like, why is robbing merchants in Icewind Dale such a good idea when you could go to the entire rest of the fucking Forgotten Realms and get, really rich pickings and warm climate? We don't know. I guess it's just narrative demand here. So there's that part. Beyond that, however, it's done fairly well, right? We have everyone struggling with their own feelings. We have the whole like Driss getting even more involved with Catti-brie. We have Wulfgar having some form of inner conflict that he's obviously not going to resolve in any meaningful way. That's just like how these books are. It cuts between those two, or sometimes three, depending on whether there's Regis and Brunner on their own, and Catti-brie and Wolf and Driz on their own. It cuts between those. It connects the two groups through some heavy-handed magic use with Robilar, the magician, or the wizard from Dudemon's ship, just teleporting everyone together so they get their stuff done. But beyond that, it's solid. We've seen R.A. Salvatore do much worse before. As I said, the other plotline, it just vaguely connects. I don't know why we needed to have this plotline here. Having, a conversation about Elithane coming to terms with trauma or not coming to terms with trauma would have been interesting. But we didn't see anything of her. We don't have her inner feelings in any way. We see her as dressed up as Lenorinel, a male elf, joining the pirates and then killing Drizzt. And we don't get any of her conflict or thoughts or whatever. It's just not there, so it feels unnecessary in a similar way that Artemis Rentreri's rivalry with Drizzt was built up in Streams of Silver. But there's even less with Lenorinel than there was with Entreri and Catti-brie and Sydney and all the others during Streams of Silver. So it just feels unnecessary just to have another threat to Drizzt personally, because otherwise he feels sort of like playing second fiddle to Wulfgar and the Hammer, so we can't have that. And that is, I think, is the only reason why that part of the plot line is in here. The resolution is equally bad. They just fight. It's not even that epic a fight compared to the ones that Drizzt and Entreri had in previous books. So it feels lackluster. So that's my thoughts on the structure. It could have been a stronger book if it had just focused on one of these plot lines, and given that one a bit more room to grow. Mashing them both together does not necessarily work. Also, the idea, the twist just doesn't really work, because nobody cares about Elithane, really, at this point. And I think that's like the weakness there, that if Elithane had been built up more as with her suffering and so forth, we would have cared. But at this point, when she pulls off the mask and we realize that it's Elithane all along, we're like, yeah, well, whatever, who cares? So, missed opportunities there. Let's talk about the Dungeons and Dragons bits, and let's talk about the Forgotten Realms bits. And once again, there's a bit of Dungeons and Dragons stuff going on here that is much closer to, well, the feeling of playing the game than the Spine of the World was. The whole setup of, Drizzt going hunting highwaymen or robbers, bandits, finding that magic, that red herring of a brand, deciding to look after Wulfgar, going on it. That's like level 1 adventure starting tricks that I would pull as a dungeon master as well. It's like, yeah, they find something, they get interested, and that pulls them into a larger adventure and so forth. That's well done. Even the, connecting, finding out information, finding out where to go, hooking up with Wulfgar and some other sort of allies and whatnot, spying out the place, the actual fortress, and going for a bit of a dungeon crawl and murder everyone. That feels realistic. It does work as a D&D tie-in novel in that it is an accurate depiction of how a Dungeons & Dragons campaign would work. With, of course, the problem that once again, all the characters are overpowered and the fights are not necessarily winnable by actual gameplay. But I mean, at this point, I guess we can cut them some slack because this is like 13 books in, so maybe these characters are now level. I have no idea. Anyway, so that part works well. What else do we see when it comes to D&D elements? Another monster, ogres. Ogres have not necessarily been around before, so we get some ogres doing ogre things. They're once again, sort of stupid because all the monsters have to be stupid. We'll talk about that in a moment. And these monsters are a matriarchy, which makes them special, and we get told that they're special for the matriarchy. Why? We don't know. But it's just in here. So we get ogres, and we get potions. See, potions have not really played a role in these books before, although they're definitely, a big deal in playing D&D. Healing potions in particular. This time around, we get a lot of potions, doing all kinds of stuff, having specific spells. Potions of strength, potions of speed, potions of armor, or stone skin, and so forth, and healing potions. So we get a lot of potions, which is cool. Maybe at the time they wanted to sell a source book about making potions in alchemy. I have not double-checked, but it's, just something here. Potions are big, and we get some more insight in how magic works, in that we have divination, illusion, and evocation as actual schools of magic mentioned by name. Evocation was never mentioned before. So there's that. And Stone Skin as a spell gets also mentioned by name, as does another one near the end when Drizzt and Elithane Lenorinel fight. That's that. Some name drops for spells, a lot of potions, some ogres, and the overall structure, which feels very Dungeons & Dragon-esque. Is there Forgotten Realms specific stuff? The answer is no. Not really, or at least nothing new. We've been to Icewind Dale before, we've been to Luskan before, we've been to Waterdeep before, we've been in the Spine of the World before. We even get a little callback look at Orkney, the Kingdom of Orkney, where we learn all about Wulfgar's exploits. So that's that. Nothing new for the Forgotten Realms, but maybe at this point there's not that much you can add in that specific area without moving to different parts of the realms, because we've seen a lot of it. So let's look about, all the stuff that's bad about this book, because there's a lot. Let's start with retconning or inconsistencies, or both. Let's start with the easy one. Sheila Creed's boat was called The Weeping Lady in The Spine of the World when Josie Puddles sold her Aegis Fang. And that's a cool name for a boat. Weeping Lady, love it. No notes, perfect. In this book, it's called Bloody Keel, because she loves to keel whole people. And you know what? That's stupid. That's really stupid and bad, and I just wanted to point it out. There's no explanation why her ship has changed, nothing of the sorts. We don't need that. I'm aware of that. But man, it's unnecessary, and it's definitely an upgrade in stupidity. Just wanted to mention it. Another inconsistency, I guess, is definitely the behavior of Elithane. Because, see, there's a scene in The Legacy when Driz rides through the Moonwood and he meets Elithane for the first time. And now it is claimed that she really tried to kill him in that scene. But what I remembered, I haven't double-checked now because, read it like last week, and I saved my sanity. I remember her crying and beating him with her fists, but that's not what I would call trying to kill him. So, an event that could have just been like a nervous breakdown or whatever is now, in hindsight, claimed to be turned into an actual attack. And that, I don't know, feels, just fits in that whole idea that a lot of these books do, in fact, build up something or change the actual events from previous books by, just claiming something. The idea of Wulfgar and Delicerty is another one. See, I just read Spine of the World, and Wulfgar comes back to Luskan, and he apologizes to everyone, and then Delicerty walks with him. Now it is built and told in a way that Wulfgar deliberately, explicitly asked Delicerty to join him and become his girlfriend and walk out with him. I don't remember that from that scene. Now, maybe I was already, not paying attention because I've been reading these fucking books for days and days and days, but that's not how I remember that thing. But it now claimed that, yes, she gave in because he asked her so nicely. It's like, that's not what happened. But it's just a general praxis, or a practice that we've seen throughout these books, that events have been slightly shifted. We see that with the Legacy, where the ending of Halfling's Gem and set up for the Legacy was changed, with that entire scene being retold to make more sense for the new story. It just happens again, which is part of the problem of this being an ongoing series that has to adhere to certain external pressures. All right, time to talk about misogyny. You knew it was coming, right? See, the pirate gang is run by lady pirates. Sheila Cree has all her lieutenants are women, and they like to kill and torture men. Why? We don't know. There's no explanation for that. It's just that women in power structures are evil. We've seen that before. We'll probably see it again. The same, however, also goes for the ogres, where it's explicit that these ogres are a matriarchy, so they're following the evil lady ogre. Is there anything beyond that? No, it just has to be mentioned. It wouldn't even have to be mentioned unless Salvatore feels it necessary to point out that women in power are actually bad. There's that level. There's obviously more of the sorts, because that's not all the misogyny. There's the usual thing where women are ugly when they're evil, or are pretending to be good looking when they're manipulative, except for, well, innocent people and Caddy Bree, who is, I guess, innocent. Case in point, Jewel Pepper. There's a really uncomfortable scene when Jewel Pepper gets, interrogated by the councilmen and councilwoman of 10 Towns. There's only one councilwoman, and she's obviously attractive and trying to seduce everyone in that room. So everyone is getting real sweaty when she just walks in, because maybe people at the frontier in 10 Towns have never seen a woman. I don't know. It just adds to that. And in a particularly bad bit, when we have the callback to Orkney, Drizzt and gang meet everyone there, so we learn again that Priscilla is of course ugly and mean, and Merelda is obviously beautiful and innocent. And in a explicit text, not someone's thought, it is claimed that Wolfgar saved Coulson, the baby, from her father's, well, her father in this case, the Lord's stupidity, and her mother's sins. So yes, trying to murder a child that's not yours is apparently stupidity and weakness, while having premarital sex is a sin. In a world where sin does not actually fit into theologies, or at least we've never talked about sins as part of any Forgotten Realms theology. So what's that say about the mindset of the author here, right? So much for that. Let's focus on racism, because of course we have this in here as well. Case in point, orcs are incredibly stupid, ogres are incredibly stupid, and goblins are incredibly stupid, and all of these are evil. And we have the exception bit again. See, we've talked about that, how Drizzt is an exception, the only one good drow, even though, according to rules, there's 15% of them are not evil. And the same happens with orcs and goblins, so you can just, kill and genocide them wherever you go, because they're all evil. In this case, the situation is really, really insidious. See, our heroes are lost in a storm, and they come to a cave, and in that cave there's a bunch of goblins, and Drizzt is like, hey, we can maybe just bribe them so we can avoid a fight, because killing everyone all the time feels kind of bad. All his friends go, no, they're evil, we need to kill them. And then obviously the goblins betray them, and they need to be killed. There's some humor with cutting off ears, because of course it's funny to dismember people. And this is where things get problematic. See, there has been a story where Drizzt meets a goblin that is good. Goblin is named Monsheim, and the story is in Realms of Valor. And it got mentioned before in a different place. The point here is that Salvatore explicitly says that Monsheim was unique, the one and only good goblin. All other goblins are in fact evil and deserve slaying. And since Monsheim has conveniently be hanged at this point, I guess, we can just go and genocide the entirety of goblins in the Forgotten Realms, and it's justified. I just wanted to point this out. So we have that narrative that entire species are considered evil. And even if we had a story where there was nuance, it is made explicitly clear. This is not, once again, not, thoughts. This is explicit text, third person narrator to the audience. This is explicit text. That was an exception, and everyone else is evil in that group. And that's not good. Just saying. It's really, really not good. So we have that part. What else do we have in this same book? We obviously have casual cruelty. I already talked about it. There's the cutting off of ears. We have a scene where our heroes attack a tower that is under attack by ogres. And there again, the combat is supposedly hilarious because people are fighting in hilarious ways, but nevertheless, and people are dying there. So there is that casual cruelty that turns combat into, well, comedy. And combat is not really fun most of the time. I mean, you can go and read Joe Abercrombie and his battles where people fall over and slip in the mud and stuff like that. There is a form of humor to be found in some forms of combat, but it's not the way it happens here. That leads to my last problem here, which is obviously the problem of superiority that builds into that. See, when there is slapstick humor in, say, the first law books, it most often is at the expense of the main characters, at the expense of the, well, I don't want to call them heroes because it's a very specific kind of book there, but it comes at the expense of these characters. In these books, here, in the Forgotten Realms novels, our heroes cannot show weaknesses. They can't actually have humor in any form in that regard. There's no form of self-deprecating humor. There's no humor or jokes at the expense of our main characters. That can't happen. Which brings us to looking at inspiration and getting it wrong. See, there's a scene in this book where Regis creeps up to a bunch of orcs sitting around a fire, and he decides to get the fire and get the food they have and get rid of them. Now, this is an interesting scene because you may remember a very similar scene from The Hobbit where Bilbo gets sent by a dwarf, or in this case, Bilbo gets sent by dwarves, Regis just gets sent by Brunner, walks up to, or creeps up and sneaks up to a fire where a bunch of monsters, trolls in Bilbo's case, orcs in this case, are sitting around, misbehaving, grumbling about food, and there's, all the classism and racism inherent in that. And then our thief decides to do something about it, to become the hero of the day, and it goes horribly wrong in The Hobbit. Bilbo tries to steal something from one of the trolls, the purse squeaks, they catch Bilbo, and you know the story. That is funny, that is interesting, and Bilbo is not overpowered. Now, Regis, of course, sees one of them having a chain around his arm, a gold chain, bracelet, whatever it is, and he decides to steal the bracelet, and he succeeds at stealing the bracelet and puts it in the pocket of a different orc, so the orcs fight each other, as the trolls do in the Tolkien book, and then they succeed, and Regis and Brunner have their meal. Do you notice something here? Yeah, it is taking a scene from a beloved book and then making your character much better than the main character in that book. And that's something we've seen again and again in these books over time. There's one scene that is incredibly ridiculous in Halfling's Gem, where they are fighting, and there's camels, and Wolfgar gets bitten by the camel, and he punches the camel in the face. Now, those of you who have seen the old Conan the Barbarian movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger may remember a scene where that happens, Conan knocking out a camel. Obviously, you can put that in here and have Wolfgar punch the camel. That feels like an homage and so forth. But what happens next is that Wolfgar takes the camel and throws the camel at his opponents. And this is what I mean. It's like, I'm not just as badass as Conan, I'm even much more badass. I can throw fucking camels. And that's very much what, a 14-year-old player might do or think and find hilarious. But it makes for really bad writing. It makes for a really bad story in that regard. I just wanted to point that part out because why? And this, I think, leaves us with the entirety. This is very much a best of or worst of most of the things we've seen before. The one saving grace, there's no drow except Drizzt in this one, which is good. But we have the misogyny, the structural misogyny, we have the casual cruelty that seems to be baked into the world, we have the racism that leads to, well, justifying genocide of monsters and so forth. We have all of these bits. We have the bad writing, we have the inconsistencies, we have the casual cruelty. All of it just comes up again. So I'm glad that this is the end, because I don't see any changes in the future in the next 26 of these books. I don't think there will be much progress there. So let's look at what we've learned here after 13 Drizzt novels. See, when I started this all the way back, I decided to make fun of these books. You know, poke a little fun, cringe at the fact that I liked some of these books as a kid, point out an issue here or there, and that's that. Because that happens a lot on BookTube. There's entire channels that make a great living of picking books that have a lot of flaws and making fun of them. Reading quotes out of context, reading quotes, pointing out inconsistencies, logical fallacies, all of that. Basically doing the cinema sins treatment for badly written, self-published YA novels. And a lot of that stuff is done, most of it is done at the expense of books that are targeted at teenage girls. It started all the way back with Twilight, and it has never really stopped. Fourth Wing is definitely the latest one getting that specific treatment, but it happens all the time. So I thought, well, you know what? I can do the same thing, but let's look at books that are very much aimed at teenage boys. They deserve some of that fun as don't they? Yeah, that's not what happened, is it? And that's what I want to talk through before we end this. See, it's easy to poke fun at something that is badly written, and these books are poorly written. There's incredibly poor word choices. Salvatore talking about lavender-shaped orbs, which I'm like, that's not how orbs work, motherfucker. Get some geometry lessons. There's more of this stuff all the time in there. You can make fun of a lot of this and just cringe at it and go, ha ha, isn't this hilarious? But these books are fairly well respected. At worst, older people go like, well, I read them as a kid. I guess I would not enjoy them that much today. That's all there is to it. There's a level of respect these books get that books like Twilight don't necessarily get from older audiences. And I thought about that. I thought about why we start, cringing and mocking certain books in the first place, and why I think that is maybe not the right approach. See, I think what lies in there is our need to feel superior, our need for superiority. As fantasy fans, we constantly struggle with the fact that there are large groups of people that think what we are reading is trash. To put it with, Salman Rushdie, who wrote an entire essay about calling Twilight and Hunger Games trash. For some reason, he did not call Harry Potter trash, but that's an argument for a different day. My point is, we've struggled with that level of acknowledgement and respect that we kind of crave somewhere for the books that we love, we don't necessarily get. And one easy approach here, which is, something that we do in other situations as well, is like, we'll just kick those who are even lower. We'll pick the low-hanging fruits, we call them trash in the hopes that those people up there with, the cultural wherewithal, they realize that we're actually not that bad. We read serious fantasy, we read Malazan, we read Second Apocalypse, we maybe even read Gene Wolfe. We're smart people, and we poke fun at Twilight because we know that stuff's trash, but it's not like the stuff we're doing. We're not writing Twilight, we're writing magical realism. Well, I'm not... we will not argue about Salman Rushdie here, but I think there is something to that need for superiority, to not feel as a way to justify our love for fantasy and escapism. I think that's part of it. And in that situation, we can see that picking, books that are targeted at women are easier prey than books that are targeted at men, because, sexism is real, and misogyny is real, and those things are structural, so we profit from the patriarchy here. So while I thought about it, well, there's some justice in just mocking books are targeted at boys, I don't think that's enough. Because these books are full of structural problems. I just mentioned a lot of them. There's structural misogyny in here, there's structural racism in here, there's casual cruelty all over the place. There is very specific toxically masculine ideas of stoicism, of using violence to solve problems, as at using rage to use problem to solve problems, or rage as the only valid emotion. There is a lot of these ideas in here, and while I understand and it can be cathartic to poke fun at them, there's something deeper going on here. I have tried to not call R.A. Salvatore a racist, misogynist, or anything of the sort, even though his books do in fact go above and beyond in these levels from what is written as law into the source material, the books. But as I said before, Dungeons and Dragons, role playing games in general, have an unwritten culture. And these books are very much an expression of that unwritten culture. They are an unwritten culture that a lot of us went through. I went through, I suspect some of you went through that. Anyone who was a middle class white boy in the late 80s, early 90s grew up in that culture. Non-white boys possibly as well. I just can't speak for them. My point is, we grew up with the idea that women are not to be trusted. Girls are either treacherous temptresses and need to be avoided because they're evil, or they're, well, innocent virgins that need to be protected. We grew up with the idea that matriarchies are bad. Women in power are bad because they're way too emotional. We need to, be stoic and rational. And the idea that force is the one way to solve problems, that rage is the only valid emotion. We grew up with a lot of these things. And there's a lot of arguments like how these are problematic, how these cause a lot of pain, cause a lot of harm with us growing older. But there's millions of people who played these games in that specific way because that's the culture we grew up with, and read these books because they reinforced those ideas, that culture that we grew up in. And going, well, I guess they were targeted at boys, and now I'm a bit older, I don't do that anymore, is not the way to deal with that. Poking fun at these is not the way to deal with this. These books are still popular. There's people out there who go like, well, obviously they're not for a grown-up and adult people like me reading Malazan or whatever, but they're alright for kids. Like, no. Would you give your kids poisoned fucking candies? No, you wouldn't. So you shouldn't give them fucking poison ideas. That's not how that should work. So playing up the nostalgic angle, I don't think is a good idea, because while we may have nostalgia for toxic things, we need to point out the toxicity. We need to disentangle these things. I have nostalgia for Conan the Barbarian stories, even for some H.P. Lovecraft stories. But there's problems with those books. And I'm not sure if reading these when you're 13 is the best way to recognize these problems. They need context. And that's something I try to provide here. The same goes, obviously, for these books. If your kids decide to start play Dungeons and Dragons, and Dungeons and Dragons has changed over the centuries, I was going to say over the decades. There's huge arguments where people complain about Dungeons and Dragons losing that very specific white patriarchal feel that these books transport. Just go online and look at old white men complaining about how Dungeons and Dragons got woke. This is an ongoing discourse, and these books keep up that older status quo. They are held up that way, and they are popular. And there's people out there right now recommending these books, talking about their beautiful character work, the great action scenes, the great world building, the fascinating plots to their 100,000 plus audience. And that's causing harm. That's either willfully ignorant, and it's a willful ignorance that only having all the white privileges out there can afford you, or they're actively, purposefully causing harm. And I can't stand for either of those. These books are shit. They were written in a very specific culture. But it's a culture that we all went through. It's a culture that is still active. And we need to confront that. We need to face that. We need to go and read other books. We need to play other games or play games in a different way. We can't just hand wave this, poke fun at it and go like, haha, isn't this ridiculous? We need to actually call out the bullshit. We need to call out the bullshit in these books. We need to call out the bullshit on the gaming table. And we need to call out the bullshit of those booktubers out there who think it's fine to just recommend these books without any further critical thoughts. You're causing harm, and I can't stand for that. Anyway, these are my thoughts on Drizztmas this year. I hope you took something out of it. I'm glad it's over. I can't wait to read good books. I just finished Player of Games. Really enjoyed it on my third, fourth reread. I just read right now The Saint of Bright Doors, which is fabulously crazy and insane. I can't wait to read something like him by Jeff Ryman. There's good books out there. I'm excited for something that opens my mind, that maybe helps me make a better person, that helps me move on. And I hope so you do you. Go read good books. Have fun. Thanks for sticking with me. I'll see you on the other side. Thanks and cheers.